Abigail Irving Monroe. I'm based at Northumbria. I'm a PhD student. I'm not the only author of this paper. Dr. Alana James, who is my supervisor, also contributed to this paper. So, hello. So the investigation started off by looking at the consumption pace of the first-hand economy and just kind of how fast this wheel was turning. It became quite clear that a lot of these products were being made and where was this waste going, and what was the kind of impact of this. So I decided to look into different waste revenues for textile. And this kind of took me to many different sectors of recycling. But then what kind of sparked my interest was the kind of effects this would have on the secondhand clothing economy, how it was affecting different parts of the secondhand clothing economy, but also the kind of process of donations. Here in the UK, there are so many different ways you can donate. You can donate at supermarkets, you can donate in schools, you can go to high street fashion shops and be incentivized into take back schemes where they make you walk through a high street store and put that old clothing into a charity donation box to buy a new clothing. So it's kind of not slowing down that kind of area of consumption. So this is where the kind of beginnings of the investigation began. So the kind of research aims in this paper were to kind of locate all of these types of donations by creating a donation distribution system. And this is kind of to build a big holistic picture of all those donation streams and how they're fed into charity retail and how they flow out of charity retail as well. And to do this, it would have to be done through a methodological approach of conducting semi-structured interviews with the key stakeholders that are involved to gain better understanding. But also the big part of this is that this is a very consumer-led industry. They are stocking the charity retail store and they're also buying from it. So the other part of the kind of fieldwork was to kind of understand this cognitive process that consumers are using when they are wanting to donate clothing. So the first phase was getting secondary data, and it was really interesting to find that within that secondary data, you could see there were areas of donation that were really heavily congested. And this kind of brings in opportunity for perhaps regenerative systems to prolong the life cycles of these garments. And then what wasn't so prevalent was this kind of focus around the new clothing that we see in charity retail spaces. And these are kind of items that have swing tags still attached. They're in pristine condition and they haven't come from a domestic setting. They've come from industry. So there was kind of a lot of questions around that I couldn't find within the secondary data. The other part that I couldn't find was this kind of donation process consumers undergo when they're going to give away their clothing, and the sustainable systems within the charity retail sector. There seems to be quite a linear approach to secondhand markets, and that can be argued in the sense that, yes, we are prolonging the lifespan of clothing. And yes, it is a good thing to do to keep products within the value chain for as long as possible. But unfortunately, here in the UK, 70% of clothing is exported overseas, and the other 30% will stay within the UK to be resold. So this brought me to phase 2 of the fieldwork, and this was kind of those key holes that I was finding. I really wanted to kind of gain some answers, and I therefore decided to interview 3 experts. First was a policymaker and charity retail association expert, and he was a great person to interview because he had made many policy manifestos, and he has outlined legislation, and is also the Charity Retail Association is a hub of where charity shops will go to kind of find that guidelines of their sorting processes and how they trade clothing in and out of the retail space. And then I decided to interview a Ghanaian-based clothing company who upcycles a lot of the exported clothing that was in Ghana, and looking at the kind of items that were found within these Ghanaian secondhand markets. What is it that they're seeing? And then thirdly, I wanted to kind of have that eyes on the ground approach, where I interviewed a charity retail store manager who's dealing with the public every single day and sees what is being donated and how much is being donated, to kind of formalize these kind of answers. So the data analysis revealed through thematic analysis that sorting and distribution was a very key role within the supply chain management of donations of secondhand clothing, and it was actually really complex. Different charities have different ways of dealing with their clothing stocks and sorting, so it was good to understand these kind of different tiers that sees the clothing flow in and out of these supply chains. And the other kind of key theme was kind of what was seen in overseas secondhand markets. As I was just saying, that market sellers will usually buy a bale of exported donated clothing. They'll open it up, and if, for instance, there are jackets in Ghana, well, Ghana is about a lot hotter than England and doesn't have any kind of cold weather, so there is absolutely no need for coats to be exported, and that kind of also initiates maybe a place of exploration for stopping this from happening on UK soil, because that clothing is just going directly to a landfill overseas. Another one was the 5k running top. I've done a 5k that's got absolutely no use, and that will be sent straight to landfill. And so what the other sightings were actually new clothing as well, ending up overseas with pristine tags on, never been worn. And the problem with this is that market sellers would open up the bale, and they are wanting to find different items, but they're finding the same item about 30 times over, that's come directly from industry. And then finally, in the material studies, it was very interesting to see what the quality was like, because actually the quality apparently is very good, and it is actually good quality of low valued items, because it's very prevalent that they've hardly been worn very many times. And what was interesting is that all charity retailers have to meet targets, and to meet those targets, sometimes their best interest was to rag the clothing to meet those targets. So it was becoming a case that perfectly functioning garments are just being given to rag because they can't sell it. It's not selling. So in the third phase, From that secondary data, I realized I had quite a lot of industry information, and I thought that the best way to move forward is kind of understand and debate what was going on in the consumer's cognitive thought process for donating. So this was done with 16 participants who were interviewed, and I was kind of wanting to understand the product life cycles of that of one garment that they have. So I would ask the question, what was the last purchase? What do you wear the most and why? And what would you like to get rid of? And it became really prevalent once I'd thematically analysed it, that the clothing that they kept a hold of, that they wore all the time, had the right fit, had a long-term use perspective, could be adaptive in seasons, and was made for longevity, and wasn't so trend-led. It would be usually a more simpler version of clothing, and clothing for degenerative qualities just shared that kind of the garments fit malfunction. They didn't value that item. It was mostly bought on a whim. They hadn't really thought about that purchase, and there was either shows of wear and tear as well. And it is good to know where the research is at the moment. I am starting to kind of create a regenerative system for the charity retail sector, and kind of understand how clothing can have this ecological ceiling through combining what's being exported and how fast that's flowing through the supply chain. As secondhand clothing can't be circular because it can't be disassembled due to fiber problems in the recycling, and also it would be a challenge for that is not equipped at the moment, should I say. So finally, in the end, I ended up creating the kind of holistic charity retail supply chain, and this was done by looking at the different tiers of charity retail. So tier 1 is kind of well established, probably a little bit more expensive charity shops like Oxfam and Trade. Tier 2 is kind of the bulk of charity shops that are perhaps up and down the UK, on the high street, very well known and established. And tier 3 are those kind of smaller independent charity shops where there might just be one or two charities. And at the bottom there is private textile recycling collections. So I'll start with them, is that they kind of sometimes pose as charities, but actually they're private companies, and they will take your donation. Sometimes it can incentivize like a little bit of money to make people donate, and that just gets sorted into bales and ends up getting exported straight away. With tier 2, it's quite interesting that all donations go to a sorting warehouse, and it's mechanically sorted, and some of it's sorted by hand. What was interesting is that the clothing will actually stay on the retail floor for 6 weeks, which was like probably one of the most longest periods of time I'd come across than any other charity store. If not sold, it can be redistributed to another store, but if after that, it will then end up getting exported, or it will be sold to a textile recycling initiatives where they do actually change textile into new materials. And this is kind of in its earlier phases, but it was probably one of the only charity shops that were doing this, a sustainable approach, and hopefully more innovation will come in that sector. For tier 2, it was a case of the consumer donating to that store, it being sorted out the back of the charity shop. Quality control was brought in. They usually look at the garments and see if it has seasonal value at that moment in time, and if it's out of season, they'll either store it or they'll send it away to be collected. What happens mostly is that the unsold stock will be removed after 4 weeks of being on the charity retail floor, and then it will go to be exported. And in tier 3, we found that once they were donated, the manager would sort the items out the back, and it had a grading system of A, of high quality good items, grade B would be high street, and grade C is low quality items. And this kind of store would work on the kind of district. So grade A would go to high come in districts, and grade B would go to middle income districts, and grade C would go to low income districts. But if, for instance, they have sat out on the charity shop floor for 2 weeks, they will spiral down, and they'll go, the high income district will then go to the middle income district, and eventually to the low income district if it doesn't sell at all, and then it will be exported. So the initial investigation was to kind of understand how new clothing is populating the charity retail stores up and down the UK. I think the investigation is still ongoing. There's still a lot to learn and know, and I think the ways we move forward is to kind of visualize making a more regenerative system in a localized economy, and circulating goods around that regenerative system is probably the probable way we can keep donations in good flow without impacting it, and without them struggling. I would like to say that I haven't been able to identify from the fashion industry exactly how new clothing is reaching our charity retail stores, but the investigation is still ongoing. So yes, thank you for listening. I look forward to any of your questions. And if you'd like to get in touch, I have my details below, and so does Dr. Alana Jones.